this narrative of the party being far outside the mainstream on women's health issues. And I think that everything matters. You know, we're talking so much about how it's a razor-thin margin and that women's votes are very much in play, and I think it's problematic, and I find it very interesting that Governor Romney is not going to distinguish himself from the entire Murdock candidacy.
And let me quickly play what Murdock said in that debate to give people more perspective in case they've missed this big story throughout the day. Let's play it.
I believe that life begins at conception. The only exception I have for to have an abortion is in that case of the life of the mother. I struggled with it myself for a long time, but I came to realize life is a gift from God, and I think even when life begins in that horrible situation of rape, that it is something that God intended to happen.
Keith, let me bring you in, and again, we're going to talk with Nia Malika Henderson and Aaron Carmel a little bit later regarding the female vote in these comments. But here again, two Senate candidates in the same election cycle having these comments, and you have people who will likely ask, what is going on, and how does Mitt Romney disassociate with the part of his party that subscribes to these notions? In this case, they're not going all Aiken on Murdock for whatever reason, meaning Aiken, they threw him under the bus, goodbye, no money, no nothing, even America Crossroads. In this case, the ad stays up.
Well, this is a party that has been taken over by the right-wing extremists. They've got to do something to make themselves palatable to the middle ground, which is what Romney's doing in the debates. But at the same time, they have this truthfulness that comes out with people like Todd Aiken and people like Richard Murdock. And the odd thing is that there are some Republicans who are in tight Senate races and people who are just reasonable Republicans who are standing up against this. People like Kelly Ayotte in New Hampshire, who says that she's canceling a fundraiser with Murdock. Right. And you've got Christine Todd Whitman, who's telling Mitt Romney he needs to repudiate this guy. Christine Todd Whitman. So you've got these women in the Republican Party who are uncomfortable with this, and the Republican Party is in danger of expanding the gender gap that's already out there if they don't stand up and have Mitt Romney do something.
Let me bring in conservative radio talk show host and Keith Boykin's best friend, Steve Tate. Steve, with all seriousness here is another GOP candidate, a big voice, or could be a big voice in your party, saying that, well, a horrible situation of rape, that it is something that God intended to happen. He's come back out and tried to clarify this remark, but even now Republican women disassociating themselves from this candidate, but Mitt Romney still backing him in an endorsement and not taking down the ad that is up just today, ironically, in Indiana. What do you think of that?
Well, it's a long cherished position within the Republican Party, Tamara, and it's one of the first planks in the platform in every state in the country that all life from conception to natural death is sacred and is a gift from God. And what I heard Richard Murdock, who I've interviewed before and is a very smart fellow and is in a race he will win, in a state Romney will win, all I heard him do, maybe I would have worded it differently, but essentially all I heard him do was echo with the first principle in almost every Republican Party platform in the United States of America.
Okay, so in the case where he says a horrible situation of rape, that it is something that God intended to happen, as you well know, some have interpreted that as, in addition to the life, as you put it, that comes out of this rape, that if the life then is a situation that God intended, then the rape is what God intended as well.
Well, I always love this idea of what exactly God intended when it comes from people.
Well, that's the very reason people don't like to see religion in politics, because it does become subject to interpretation of what you or maybe Richard Murdock believes is God intended or not God intended. That's why there's a separation of church and state.
Why is it when the president says, when he quotes from Cain in the Bible, the first murderer, I am my brother's keeper, to justify the welfare state, how come that's religion that it's okay to bring into politics, and when it comes to morality, it's not?
I'm not saying that either. I'm asking you that there are people who interpret that comment made by this Senate candidate as what I just explained, that if your notion is that God oversees all, then why try to backtrack on the rape part? I am not defending anyone's religious beliefs here. That is a personal conversation you'd have to pose to the president if you were so fortunate to have him come on your show. I'm asking you about Richard Murdock.
Well, I can answer your question. I'd be happy to answer that question. The answer to that question from a Christian perspective, which is what Richard Murdock was bringing, the answer to that question from a Christian perspective is we are all responsible for our individual choices, but a sovereign God has the ability to take tragedy and turn them into blessings. I can't think of anything other than the most seminal moment in the Christian faith, the crucifixion to the resurrection. That is an example of God taking a tragedy and turning it into something good. What man meant for evil, God can turn into good. And that's what I heard Richard Murdock say. And I think the other side, if they really just think these children deserve to live, they ought to just come right out and say, hey, those kids like Rebecca Kiesling, a lawyer in the battleground state of Michigan, you don't deserve the right to live. If that's what they think, then they ought to just say so.
Steve, if this was such an easy issue, a slam dunk for the Republican Party, first of all, you need to tell your Republican Party standard bearer, Mitt Romney, because he's been all over the map on this issue. And secondly, you need to tell the Republican women who are standing up and saying, well, this is not something we feel comfortable with, because the Republican Party is being hijacked, or has already been hijacked, by the social extremists. Now, I understand, I respect you, Steve, because you're at least willing to be consistent in your position and viewpoint, but your candidate, Mitt Romney, has not been.
Okay, and let me transition real quick to...
By the way, Keith is right about that.
He is. Neil Henderson, let me get you in on this. This Des Moines Register interview with the president. We started out the day with the campaign not wanting the interview to be released. It was 30 minutes long, off the record. After some objections by the paper, they've been able to release it. Part of the quote, which is so interesting, the president, his team didn't want this out. Let me read part of what he had to say. It says, and since this is off the record, I will just be very blunt. Should I win a second term, a big reason I will win a second term is because the Republican nominee and the Republican Party have so alienated the fast-growing demographic group in the country, the Latino community. Why wouldn't the administration or the Obama campaign want that part? A blunt comment that obviously is true when we look at the demographics that will matter come election night.
And it's actually very similar to something he said before, about a year ago at a Univision forum, where he talked about how he would run against Republicans, and he essentially said all he would have to do was run some of the debate clips from the Republican presidential primary, where some of the Republicans were saying things about illegal immigrants and things like that, and saying sort of not necessarily disparaging things about immigrants, but certainly framing immigrants in a way that might not be to people's likings. So interesting. I think that they tried to have this off the record. I think it speaks to both campaigns being overly cautious in these last 13 days. Yeah. They don't want to draw attention to anything that will turn into a Twitter meme, that will turn into a cable news moment, a YouTube moment. And so that, I think, is really what is behind this. But I think ultimately it's a pretty harmless comment that he made.
And the president went on to say that this is not a relatively new phenomenon. George Bush and Karl Rove were smart enough to understand the changing nature of America. But let me play, Michael. Babe Buchanan was on with Luke Russert on the Daily Rundown this morning, and he posed the question about the Latino voters in this country and Governor Romney and the Republican Party. Let me play it.
Why do Latinos distrust Governor Romney so much?
Well, you know, it goes back. That the Latino population is, generally speaking, part of the Democratic base. And so what we're trying to do, obviously, is reach out to all Americans.
George W. Bush won 40% of the Latino vote in 2004. So they're not completely loyal to one side. It shows there's room for growth. How come Governor Romney can't do that?
You know, we're doing everything we can, but I think our message is clearly resonating with Americans.
So, Michael, what's your take on that? I mean, Babe Buchanan, she obviously is with the Romney campaign, tried to paint the picture that Latinos vote lockstep with the Democratic Party, but we know, as Luke so wonderfully pointed out, that was not the case just in the recent future with Bush.
Well, two things come to mind. The DREAM Act would be at the top of that list, and so too the whole Arizona issue, which I think has furthered a narrative of the Democratic Party being a more hospitable place for Hispanics. And, you know, the issue long-term for the GOP, when you look at the demographics in the future as far as 2050, if the Republicans can't right themselves with the Hispanic community, it bodes terribly for their ability to win any national elections going forward.
And Steve, let me bring you back. In Ohio, we know the importance of that state. We're going to take a look at some of the numbers, the electoral map as it's shaping up. But Congressman Paul Ryan set to give a speech in this hour.